Well, for more discussion, I'm joined now in studio by former Europe and Middle East editor at the Associated Press, Dan Perry. Thanks for being with us as always. Now, when it comes to Sinwar, we see the details here of this year-long manhunt that every time the IDF got close to him, whether it was underground or above ground, he was just a mere days away, it seemed. Yet when they finally caught him, he was above ground, despite hiding out in these tunnels for at least 6 months and likely longer than that, both above and below ground. And so what does this really say about the operations inside Gaza right now that forced Sinwar to come out from hiding and be in these houses above ground?
I think we always knew that eventually their supplies would run out. Eventually patience would run out. Eventually the noose would tighten and they would have to come out. It took a year and over a year. It's not like it happened very quickly. And also, I think, if we're being honest, it happened randomly. I mean, they knew he was in that area, but it's not like the forces attacking that building were special forces that had him cornered. They discovered after the fact that one of the 3 or 4 terrorists killed was Sinwar. Look, it's such a tragic story, you know. I mean, Sinwar emerges, I think, as this diabolical and rather imbecilic figure who brought utter ruination upon his people. And yet, everyone who met him and interviewed him speaks of a person who was undoubtedly dark and evil, but also very intelligent and had charisma, yet potential to do something.
That's what makes you such a powerful leader.
Positive with his life. And this is what he did. Now, I think his demise is a moment of a great symbolic value, but also, practically speaking, I think it should enable all sides to move to a new phase. And I think it's interesting that in the Arab world we hear very little mourning of him. It looks like they're able to get over their agony rather easily. It's no secret that Hamas was detested by the moderate Sunni Arabs, at least. I only wish they had the courage of their convictions and were able to speak more clearly, and maybe now that he's gone, that might happen.
We continue to talk about the day after, but it seems with this major development, there could finally be this room and this conversation that has been needing to happen for months now.
Absolutely. One of the impediments from Israel's side to doing the hostage deal that so many have been calling for 2, 3, 4, 5 months ago was the understanding that the deal as constituted really basically means getting back the hostages in exchange for an end to the war, at which point, even though Gaza is in the state of ruin, Sinwar would be marching around amid the ruins declaring victory, and Israel didn't want to give him that because narratives have a great importance in the human experience, and maybe especially in the culture of the wider Middle East, and they weren't prepared for that. That's no longer going to happen. So at least one impediment is gone. There are many other impediments. During the interview just now, you mentioned one of them, which is fear, that whatever other entity goes in will still face violence from what remains of Hamas. That's certainly true. And there are ways to mitigate that by offering them amnesty or integration or exile or killing the rest of them, or accepting that you're going to deal with an insurgency for a time. Another impediment is the narrative impediment. It is unfortunate, and I think it's still possible to use this moment. It's unfortunate that no one in the Arab world has yet said Hamas brought catastrophe. They were wrong, and now something else needs to happen that will be right. If that should happen, if we will start hearing that from Egypt, from Saudi Arabia, from the UAE, maybe even from Qatar, that will create the kind of legitimacy that would be extremely helpful at this point in aid of a day-after scenario. The last impediment is the Israeli government that has a built-in roadblock in the form of the right-wing, the far-right elements in it that want to occupy Gaza and settle it with Jews. Now, Netanyahu says Israel doesn't want that. Meanwhile, this week or next, a third of his Knesset members are holding a conference aimed at promoting that. And of course, that third of the Likud controls the future of the coalition, because the coalition has 68, I guess now, out of 120. So Israel's got to decide what it wants to do when it grows up. Does it really want to go back to Gaza, reoccupy Gaza, reintegrate 2.5 million Palestinians that now many of them have a good reason to hate it, back into some kind of single entity that's not that democratic, because Palestinians can't vote and that's under military occupation? Obviously, I feel this is lunacy. And so the right thing to do is to figure out the optimal moment where to declare victory and to move to a day after phase.
Well, and you mentioned some of the reactions or lack of reactions that we're seeing coming out of the Arab world. We have heard so many reactions following Sinwar's death when it does come from Western leaders, from Iran, even from Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, who sent his condolences for the terror leader's killing. But very notably, there have been few words from Arab countries in the region. Well, for more on this, we're joined by writer and political commentator Dr. Nasir Al-Omari. Dr. Nasir, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, what are the reactions right now from Qatar, where Hamas leaders outside of Gaza, this is where they reside? We have heard very little from them, along with Saudi Arabia, Egypt, other countries in the region. They've all been pretty quiet following this major development.
Yes, the Arab League, represented by Egypt and the Gulf countries, continue to repeat that they reject the Israeli actions in Gaza, in Lebanon. They view them, they view them as aggression. However, I think there is another narrative in the Gulf countries, in Jordan, at least when it comes to the regimes and heads of these regimes. I think for the first time, they view curtailing Iran's influence and expansionism in the Middle East positively. And the Arab regimes are celebrating the success that Israel has had against Sinwar and against Hassan Nasrallah. However, the Arab street is emotional. They are anti-Israeli. And these regimes have to continue to condemn Israel publicly, at least.
Dr. Al-Omari, my guest here, Dan Perry, in studio, has a quick question for you as well.
Yeah, as regards the Arab street, I know it's divided. I spent many years in the Arab world. I wonder if you think there's any way to get them to, despite the emotions and despite the narratives, to get them to accept what I believe is reality, which is that Hamas has been fighting for 35 years to prevent a Palestinian state and a two-state solution, and therefore, if you are pro-Palestinian, you should be anti-Hamas. If you want a two-state solution, you should be mourning what the war that Hamas launched on October 7th. In other words, what I believe to be, and please forgive me, an infantile equating of Hamas and the Palestinian cause. Is there any way to break it?
Yes, I believe the narrative has started to sink in, and there are a lot of people who are saying, you know what, this jihadist approach to Israel has actually destroyed Gaza, is now destroying Lebanon. They blame Hassan Nasrallah for in Lebanon, the opposition, even probably within his own, population. They blame him for displacing them. So this narrative is sinking in. However, you have forces like Al Jazeera, the Muslim Brotherhood, Iran, who continue to say this is part of the struggle. And no matter, how tough it gets, Israel is paying a price. In the long run, we will alter this situation and we will eventually win if we just can be patient.
Dan, right now the IDF continuing with these operations inside southern Lebanon, inside the capital Beirut as well. Some people are wondering how Sinwar's death could leave room for not only negotiations in Gaza, but negotiations in the north as well. Could Hezbollah be looking at all of these constant Israeli wins and be more willing to negotiate some sort of a halt in hostilities?
Well, it depends if they're willing to negotiate to the point of creating a reasonable day-after situation in Lebanon, which I kind of doubt. Look, you have to know how to tell your story. One of the problems Israel has had in Gaza is that everyone can understand they want to get rid of Hamas and get back the hostages. But no one knows what Israel wants afterwards because the Israeli government is engineered to not enable that. So that's a problem in Gaza. In Lebanon, there's no problem. Israel's story could not be more reasonable. And I'm frankly perplexed at the seemingly naive Western politicians, including Biden, implicitly a little bit, but certainly Trudeau and Macron, who speak about a ceasefire and escalations. Why should they want a ceasefire? And what are they talking about when they say escalation? I mean, how do they genuinely want an Iranian-engineered, armed, trained, and funded proxy army that is the biggest non-state army in the world to take over Lebanon, hold it hostage, and be attacking another country? Is that something they think should be allowed to continue? It's stupefying. So I would honestly think that if they can't help, they should get out of the way. Now, in the case of Biden, it's obviously different because he enables the war to continue by arming Israel and giving it backing at the United Nations. So I think Israel needs to be aligned with the U.S., but I can't believe the U.S. isn't really happy about the degradation of Hezbollah. And there's only one way this can end, with Hezbollah no longer controlling a third of Lebanon, with Lebanon controlling its own sovereignty. And anyone with a sliver of a shadow of a brain must understand that the Lebanese leadership also wants this, and you see this.
And we've heard this message coming from the Lebanese leadership actually just this past week.
Interim Prime Minister Najib Mikati has been increasingly showing a little bit of courage by saying things like we shouldn't embroil ourselves in foreign conflicts, and actually talking about implementing 1701. What does that mean? Disarming Hezbollah and having the Lebanese army control the border. Now, it may be a while yet before they can, and therefore what's needed probably is some version of a multinational force. And Israel should come out and say it, because even though in recent months there's been some military successes, and I think they're clear for all the world to see, on a public diplomacy front, it's still the same rather perplexing failure to articulate what you want. And in the case of Lebanon, it's particularly odd. The failure is particularly striking because what they want is A, eminently reasonable, and B, not embroiled in any ridiculous conflict with Israel's far right. No one wants to occupy Lebanon. Everyone wants Hezbollah gone. And Israel's demands could not be more reasonable. Maybe it would help to put the likes of Macron back in their place if Israel articulated them with any level of coherence.
We're talking about Israel's possible preparations. Will they, won't they attack, pretty much, especially in the midst of all of these different leaks, these different reports coming out in media as well. It does endanger some of the different retaliations between Israel and Iran, and really the whole security throughout the region.
Maybe, what we've seen in the document it's not like the document actually showed what Israel is about to do exactly. It's not great. I can't tell if it was purposeful or something else, low level or mid level, probably not high level, if it was intentional. But putting all that aside, there are bigger issues here. I mean, Israel has major strategic aims with Iran, strategic aims that it can't achieve on its own, namely, to get Iran to stop filling the region with proxy armies that are more powerful than the countries that host them, and bent on attacking Israel and ending Iran's nuclear program. It would be really good to get the Americans to assist in achieving those goals, and the benefit would primarily accrue to the people of Iran, who have been oppressed by this terrible regime for 45 years. Now, Israel can't fix this all on its own, so there is an argument that maybe, even though tactically speaking, they need to do something to respond to the biggest ballistic missile attack in human history, maybe it be measured and they keep their powder relatively dry in exchange for an understanding with the Americans that the day after the election, America enters a new phase vis-a-vis Iran where they stop normalizing this insanity.
Do you think that's likely to happen?
I don't know if it's likely to happen. I'm not sure it's likely to not happen, because if things continue as they have been, they will lead to more and more mayhem in the region, and we've seen that the world is unhappy with that. And Iran will eventually get a nuclear weapon, and the world is directly threatened by that. So the big question is it more likely that Trump would do such a policy, or Harris? I'm not sure what the answer is, because even though Trump, or at least the right wing in America, has greater clarity about the danger of the jihadi chaos project and the unacceptability of the way Iran comports itself, Trump is also isolationism adjacent, and his one big idea is that he hates the forever wars and everything is transactional and America first. I'm not so sure that he's going to be eager to get involved in the potentially very dangerous and escalatory action vis-a-vis Iran. That type of neocon attitude actually most exists these days in the moderate wing of the Democratic Party headed by Biden. I don't know if Harris is in the same place, so it's complicated. But what I'm saying is there is a real account to be settled with Iran. It's not just Israel. Israel's on the vanguard of a global coalition of like-minded moderate countries, the entire West basically, or that part of the West that knows what it's looking at when it's looking at Iran, and the moderate Arab world. And so we really desperately need a strategic and focused government in Israel that doesn't have reveries about reoccupying and resettling Gaza, and instead keeps its eye on the prize.